The drive from Ithaca to Buffalo takes 4 hours on a good day. I made it in 3:45 on the Thursday morning in November because I left at 5 o'clock before Gary woke up and before I had time to talk myself into believing things were fine. My mother, Frances Callahan, had been living with my older brother Dennis since February. She'd had a mild stroke in January, not devastating. Her speech came back fully. Her movement mostly came back, but she lived alone and she was 74, and Dennis had offered, and it had seemed like the right answer at the time. By November, I had started to doubt it. Here is what I noticed. Her phone calls got shorter. Frances had called me every Sunday morning since I was 26 years old, sometimes an hour, sometimes more. She would tell me about her garden, about whatever book she was reading, about the neighborhood gossip she collected like other people collect receipts. She noticed small things. She remembered everything. In November, the calls were running 4 to 6 minutes. She was doing most of the listening and not most of the talking. And Pamela's voice, Dennis's wife, was audible in the background at some point in every call. I told Gary I was going to visit. "You were just there in September," he said. "I know." He looked at me for a moment across the kitchen table. Gary was in the Army for 11 years before we met. He does not waste words, and he does not talk people out of things they've already decided. "You want me to come?" "No," I said. "Not yet." He nodded and turned back to his coffee. I drove through upstate New York in the dark, the highway empty, the heater running too loud. By the time I was close to Buffalo, the sun was up and flat and cold. I stopped at a gas station outside Clarence to use the restroom and stared at myself in the mirror above the sink for longer than necessary. I teach art to 12-year-olds. I have done this for 19 years. I know when a student is not telling me something. I know the particular quality of a person who is performing fine. My mother was performing fine. Dennis and Pamela's house in Amherst was a gray colonial on a street of gray colonials. Dennis's truck was in the driveway. He was supposed to be at work by 9. It was 8:40. I rang the bell. Pamela answered. Her face did a specific thing, a half-second recalibration before she smiled. "Nora, we weren't expecting you." "I know. I should have called. Is Mom up?" "She's in her room. She gets tired in the mornings." My mother had never gotten tired in the mornings. My mother got up at 6 every day of her life until the stroke, made coffee, and was functional before the news came on. I said nothing about this. I found my mother in the back bedroom sitting in a chair by the window. She was wearing a blue cardigan I recognized and holding a library book she put down when I came in. She looked up, and her face, it moved through something I recognized as relief before it settled into the kind of careful calm that people wear when someone might be listening nearby. "Nora." She stood to hug me, and I felt how thin her shoulders were. She had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. We sat together. She asked about Gary, about school, about the drive, normal things. Her voice was even. She looked at the door once. After 12 minutes, I heard Dennis in the hallway. He appeared in the doorway, not surprised exactly, more like composed for an entrance. "Hey, Nor. Didn't know you were coming. Spontaneous trip. Long drive. I needed to see Mom." He nodded. Something moved behind his eyes and then settled. "Of course. We were just about to have lunch." "You staying?" Before I answered, my mother said, very quietly, "Lou's shop is still on Clement Street. You remember Lou? He'd love to see you." Dennis looked at her, then at me, then, "Mom, she just got here." "I know," my mother said. I just remembered. The rest of the visit was lunch and conversation about nothing, and Pamela asking polite questions about my school, and Dennis telling a long story about a contract that had almost fallen through. I watched my mother eat half of her soup. I watched her look at the door. When I left, she hugged me at the front steps and held on a half-second longer than usual. I drove to Clement Street. My mother, Frances Mary Callahan, née Riley, worked as an accountant for 28 years at a regional manufacturing company called Halbert Industrial. She was not a flashy person. She kept her hair cut short, drove sensible cars, owned exactly 2 pairs of dressy shoes, and had been known among her colleagues for being able to hold 7-digit figures in her head without writing them down. She was 43 when my father died. Leonard Callahan, heart attack, 1994. I was 12. Dennis was 19 and already studying business. In the years that followed, Frances did not fall apart. She worked. She paid the mortgage. She put both of us through college in full. She did this without announcing that she was doing it. It was just what happened, what needed to happen, and she made it happen. The adding machine was on her desk from before I can remember. Big, beige, mechanical, the kind that made noise when you pressed the keys, that printed on a strip of paper, that belonged to a specific era of accounting before everything moved to screens. She kept it even after everything went to computers. She said it helped her think. When I was 14 and my mother was trying to explain compound interest to me, she demonstrated it on that machine. The numbers rolling under the paper, the clatter of keys, the printed strip she tore off and handed me. "This is what patience does," she said. "It multiplies." I kept the strip of paper for years. I don't know what happened to it. My brother Dennis is 52. He owns a contracting business, residential builds, renovations. He's done well by most measures. His house is large. His truck is new. His daughter Cassandra goes to a good school. He has the particular ease of a man who has spent his adult life being the competent one, the one who handles things, and who has learned to rely on that reputation the way some people rely on credit. He and I have never been close. Not unfriendly. There were years of normal dinners and normal holidays, but not close. He thought I was too sensitive. I thought he was too certain. We settled into a polite distance that worked as long as we didn't need anything from each other. Then our mother had the stroke. I was 4 hours away with a school schedule I couldn't immediately walk away from. Dennis was 20 minutes away and available, and he offered. And Frances said she thought it would be fine, and there was no reason at the time to say it wouldn't be. The February through May of that year, things seemed all right. I visited in March and in May. My mother seemed tired but okay. She had physical therapy on Thursdays. She was rereading old mystery novels. She said the stroke had scared her and she was glad not to be alone. In July, she mentioned that she'd signed some papers with Dennis. "Financial stuff," she said, "to make things easier." "What kind of papers?" "Just to let him manage the accounts for now. While I'm getting back on my feet." He explained it all. I thought, financial power of attorney. I thought, that's not unreasonable given the circumstances. I thought, she's 74 and recently had a stroke, and her son lives nearby and is offering to help. I did not think what I should have thought. That was July. By November, I was driving to Clement Street in the cold to find a man named Lou. Lou Marchetti ran a shop that sold vintage office equipment, typewriters, calculating machines, old filing systems, the mechanical relics of mid-century paperwork. It occupied a narrow storefront between a laundromat and a Vietnamese restaurant, and it smelled like machine oil and old rubber. Lou himself was 71, with a full gray beard and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had known my mother since 1979, when they'd worked at adjacent desks at Halbert Industrial, before Lou left to start his business. They had lunch twice a month, every month, for the better part of 30 years. When I walked in and said my name, he looked at me for a moment and then said, "Sit down." He locked the front door. Lou's back office had 2 chairs, a desk covered in invoice copies, and a space heater that worked too hard and smelled faintly like burning. He moved a stack of catalogs off the second chair and handed me a folder. "She's been giving me things to hold since April," he said. "A little at a time, always during lunch. She'd say she was going to the restroom and she'd pass me something. Took me a while to understand what I was holding." He sat down. He looked at the folder in my hands. "Open it," he said. "I'll stay quiet while you read." What I read over the next 35 minutes was a document my mother had been building since April 7 months, of careful, methodical note-taking in her precise accountant's script. Dates, figures, descriptions, document titles. The handwriting was smaller than her usual, which I recognized as her formal mode, the handwriting she used for things that mattered. She had cataloged the following. In March, Dennis had had her sign a document he described as a power of attorney for healthcare and financial decisions. She had signed it, but she had also, quietly, photographed the document with her phone and printed a copy at the library. The document she signed was financial power of attorney with a broad operational clause broader than she'd understood when Dennis explained it. In April, her personal savings account, $341,000, the product of 38 years of careful saving and investment, had been transferred into a joint account with Dennis's name on it. Dennis had told her this was for simplicity, so I can pay your bills without having to ask you every time. In May, her house, the one she had owned since 1986, the one she had paid off in full in 2009, which she had been renting to a young couple for $1,400 a month, had been listed for sale. She had not been told it was being listed. She had found out because her tenant called her to ask about the listing. The listing had been placed by a realtor Dennis knew. The documentation showed Dennis as authorized agent under the power of attorney. In June, the rental income from the house, which had been going directly to Francis's personal account, was redirected to the joint account. The tenant paid. The money arrived. Francis no longer had direct visibility to it. In September, she had found a draft document on the kitchen printer that Dennis had forgotten to clear. She had photographed it. It was a preliminary consultation summary from a guardianship attorney, noting that Dennis was exploring options for full financial and medical guardianship on the grounds that Francis showed declining cognitive capacity. She was not declining. She had a mild right-side weakness and an occasional word retrieval delay that her neurologist had characterized as expected residual effect, non-progressive. She had been managing her own medications, her own correspondence, and 7 months of covert documentation while living in her son's house without him noticing. At the bottom of the folder, on a separate piece of paper in Francis's handwriting, was a single line. I needed time to build the file. Nora will know what to do with it. Lou said nothing while I read. When I finally looked up, I couldn't find a word for a moment. He waited. She thought I'd know what to do, I said. Yes. She's been building this for 7 months. She said the stroke scared her, Lou said. Not because of what she lost, because of what it made her a target for. I looked down at the folder again, at her handwriting, at the figures. Did you read all of this? Enough. And you just kept holding it. She trusted me to hold it. A pause. Your mother is the most methodical person I've ever known, including 32 years in that business. She doesn't do anything without a reason. I held the folder on my lap for another minute. Outside, through the front window, I could see the street. A woman pushing a stroller. 2 pigeons at the base of a parking meter. She also wanted you to have that, Lou said, and nodded toward a corner of the back office. On a low shelf, wrapped in a cloth grocery bag, was the adding machine. I want to tell you about what the next 2 weeks felt like, because I think there's a version of this story that skips past it and goes straight to action. And that wouldn't be honest. I drove home to Ithaca with the folder on the back seat and the adding machine wrapped in its grocery bag in the trunk. I went over everything in my head the entire 4 hours. I thought about my mother sitting across from Dennis at dinner while this was happening. I thought about her passing documents to Lou in the 20 minutes between ordering lunch and the food arriving. I thought about the word target, the word Lou had quoted her as using. She had known early on what was happening. She had made a decision that the safest thing to do was to document and wait rather than to confront, because she was living in his house and because confrontation without evidence would become a story about her being confused. She had chosen the patient version, the methodical version, the adding machine version. Gary was home when I arrived. He was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a laptop. He looked at me, then at the bag I was carrying, then at my face. He said, "Sit down." I sat down. "How bad?" I gave him the folder. He read it without speaking. When he finished, he put it on the table between us with his hands flat on it. "Okay," he said. "That was all. Not I'll handle it, and not what do you want to do. Just the acknowledgement that the situation was what it was." I needed that more than anything else he could have said. "I need to find an elder law attorney," I said. "I know. Someone who can look at the power of attorney. The guardianship consultation. The account transfer. I know." He picked up the folder. "We'll start tomorrow. I'll make calls in the morning." We sat at the table until late in the evening. We did not eat dinner. At some point, Gary made more tea, and we kept sitting there, And I thought about my mother passing papers to Lou in a restaurant bathroom, and I could not find a way to think about it that didn't hurt in a very specific place. The attorney's name was Margaret Chen. Her office was in Rochester, 40 miles from Ithaca, and she had spent 23 years in elder law. She was 60, precise, and had a particular way of asking questions that made you understand that every answer was being placed somewhere specific in her mind. I brought the folder. I brought copies of everything. She read while I watched her face. Then she said, "Tell me about the companion account. I don't know what that is. Does the name Halbert Industrial mean anything to you?" That's where my mother worked. For 28 years. Margaret nodded slowly. The company had a standard accountant benefit from the 1980s through early 2000s, a companion account structure through their fiduciary trustee. It was designed to flag unusual large transactions on any employee-linked account and hold funds in escrow, pending personal confirmation from the account holder. My mother left Halbert in 2007. Yes, but the companion account structure doesn't automatically terminate. It runs as long as the original account exists or until the account holder formally closes it. A pause. Does your mother have a savings account she's had since before 2007? The one Dennis transferred. Which she opened when? I looked at my notes. The account number in her documentation, I found the page. She noted original Halbert companion linked account. Margaret made a specific small sound that I could not immediately classify. Then she said, "Nora, do you understand what this means?" I was beginning to. When Dennis transferred the funds to the joint account, Margaret said carefully, the companion account system would have flagged it as an unusual large transaction. The funds would not have transferred cleanly. They would be in escrow right now, pending Francis's personal confirmation. Francis never confirmed it. Francis, Margaret said, with something in her voice I would think about for a long time afterward, may have known exactly what she was doing when she didn't confirm it. I sat with that for a moment. My mother, who had spent 28 years at that company understanding every system in the building, who had had that account since the 1980s, who had watched Dennis explain the transfer to her, and not said a word about the escrow mechanism that would render the whole thing effectively frozen. "He thinks he has the money," I said. "He thinks he has the money," Margaret confirmed. "He has been operating on that assumption for 8 months. And in reality, $341,000 has been sitting in institutional escrow, waiting for Francis Callahan to confirm the transfer, which she hasn't done." Outside Margaret's window, November light came through on the bare branches of a maple tree. I thought, patient. I thought about the adding machine and the strip of paper, and this is what patience does. "What do I do next?" I said. Margaret opened a notepad. "First," she said, "we establish that your mother has full legal capacity. If Dennis is building toward guardianship, we need that on record before he can file." The capacity evaluation happened on a Thursday in December. Dr. Amara Osei was a geriatric specialist at Buffalo General, and the evaluation took 3 hours. I waited in a coffee shop 2 blocks away and checked my phone 47 times. Francis passed with what Dr. Osei described in her written report as clearly intact executive function, strong short and long-term memory, and appropriate orientation to time, place, and situation. The right side weakness was noted as non-progressive residual from the stroke. The word retrieval delays were categorized as within normal range for post-stroke recovery. The report concluded, Francis Callahan retains full capacity for financial and medical decision-making. I read the report sitting in the car outside the coffee shop. The maple I could see through the window of the parking lot had finally lost all its leaves. They were in the gutters, brown and flat. I called Margaret. She said, "Good, now we can move." I had not told Dennis I was working with Margaret Chen. I had not changed my behavior at family communications. I called Francis every Sunday. I visited in mid-December and brought a pot of soup, which Pamela accepted at the door. I looked fine. I was performing fine. Dennis called me on a Wednesday in late December. His voice was level, not warm, not cold, businesslike. "Nora, I think we need to have a conversation about Mom's situation." "Of course," I said. "Whenever you want. She's been having some difficult moments." I've been talking to a specialist about what kind of support she might need going forward. What kind of difficult moments? A pause. Memory issues. Confusion. I don't want to alarm you, but I think she may need a higher level of care than we can provide. I thought about the capacity evaluation report. I thought about Frances passing documents to Lou in a restaurant bathroom for 7 months. That's concerning, I said. What does her neurologist say? Her neurologist hasn't seen everything I've seen day to day. Has she had a full geriatric capacity evaluation? Another pause. Shorter this time. Not yet formally. That's something I was going to arrange. I think that would be a good idea, I said, for everyone's peace of mind. He said, Nora, I want to be honest with you. I know you and I don't always see things the same way, and I know you're going to have instincts about all of this. But I'm the one here day to day. I have power of attorney. I am legally responsible for her well-being. I know you are, I said. A long pause. I'm saying, he said, and his voice had shifted, not quite a threat, but the geography of a threat, that if your visits are going to be disruptive to her routine, that's something I have to consider. I held the phone for a moment. I understand, I said. I'll let you know when I'm planning to visit. I ended the call. Gary was in the next room. He appeared in the doorway. I said, he just told me he can limit my access to my mother. Gary looked at me for a moment. Then he said, does Margaret know about the power of attorney documents your mom photographed? She has copies. Okay, he said, and went back to what he was doing. That was the lowest point. Not because the threat was new information. I'd understood what Dennis was doing since I'd read the folder in Lou's back office, but because hearing it out loud in his voice made it real in a different way. He was telling me that he had the mechanism to remove me from my mother's life, and he wanted me to understand this. I did understand it. I also understood that he had moved $341,000 into a joint account that contained, as of December, $0 of the $341,000. Margaret filed the appropriate paperwork in the first week of January. End of January. Power of attorney challenge based on the capacity documentation. Notice of the companion account escrow to the relevant fiduciary trustee. A formal request that the house listing be suspended pending review of the authorized agent designation. Dennis's response came through his own attorney in the second week of January. The response was, in Margaret's characterization, confident. Dennis believed he had clean documentation. He believed the power of attorney was solid. He believed the money was in the joint account. He believed Frances's capacity was questionable. He requested a family mediation meeting. Margaret read me the request over the phone. He wants to sit down with everyone present and resolve this without litigation. He thinks he's in a stronger position, I said. Yes. Does he know about the companion account? He would have no reason to. Does he know about Dr. Osei's evaluation? Not unless Frances told him, which she had no reason to do. I thought about my mother watching Dennis arrange a mediation meeting to present his version of her capacity to a room of people. I thought about her sitting quietly in that house in Amherst for 8 months, passing documents to Lou, preserving the escrow mechanism, photographing papers, and waiting. Accept the meeting, I said. The mediation was held on a Saturday in February at a neutral office, a conference room in a downtown Buffalo building used for exactly this kind of meeting. Round table, water pitchers, a mediator named Howard, who had the particular exhausted patience of someone who had watched too many families argue about money. Dennis arrived with his attorney, a man named Wallace, from a firm that handled estates. Pamela came with him and sat one chair back, like a second row. Dennis was in a good jacket and had the composure of someone who had run the projections and liked his numbers. I arrived with Margaret, and Frances arrived with me. When Dennis saw Frances walk in with me, something moved through his face that had not been part of his preparation. He had expected Margaret. He had not expected his mother to have been told about the meeting, to have made the 4-hour drive with me, to be sitting down at this table with her reading glasses in her jacket pocket and a cup of coffee in her hand. He recovered. Mom, I didn't know you were coming, Nora asked me, Frances said. I thought it was appropriate. You didn't have to. Dennis, she said, and the way she said his name, not sharp, just even, the way she used to say it when I was growing up, and something had been decided. I think I did. Howard opened the meeting with the standard framing. Both parties present. Margaret Chen representing Nora Callahan. Robert Wallace representing Dennis Callahan. The purpose: to discuss Frances Callahan's care situation and resolve outstanding financial and legal questions without litigation. Dennis spoke first. He was fluent. He had clearly rehearsed. He laid out Frances's stroke, the care challenges, his role as power of attorney holder, the account management decisions he'd made for her benefit, the house sale as a way to simplify her finances. He was credible. He was organized. He sounded like a responsible son. When he finished, Howard looked at Margaret. Margaret said, "Thank you. I'd like to address a few items, beginning with Frances's cognitive status." She slid Dr. Osei's report across the table to Howard and to Wallace. Dennis looked at the report. He looked at the date. "When was this done?" "December," Margaret said. "Standard geriatric capacity evaluation at Buffalo General. The conclusion is on page 1. Wallace read it. His posture changed slightly. He leaned toward Dennis and said something quietly. Dennis's composure held. "This is one evaluation," Dennis said. "It doesn't. It establishes capacity," Margaret said simply, "which is relevant to everything that follows." She moved to the power of attorney documentation. She laid out the challenge, the scope of the operational clause, the question of whether Frances had fully understood its range when she signed it. Wallace began to respond, and the exchange became technical and went back and forth for several minutes. Through all of it, Frances sat beside me and said nothing. She had a glass of water in front of her. She turned it once, a small rotation, and then set it down. Then Margaret said, "I'd like to discuss the joint account transfer," Dennis said. The transfer was for efficiency. To allow me to manage her expenses, I understand. And the funds were transferred in April? Yes. Could you confirm the current balance in the joint account? Dennis looked at Wallace. Something not quite uncertainty, but adjacent to it moved across his face for the first time. "I don't have figures with me," Dennis said. "I'd ask you to check, if you don't mind." The specific figure matters for the next part of the discussion. A pause. Dennis pulled out his phone. He opened his banking application. He found the account. I watched his face. He looked at it for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. He scrolled. He looked again. "That can't," he stopped. Wallace looked at Dennis's phone. Wallace's expression moved somewhere different. "Is there a problem?" Margaret asked. Her voice was completely level. "The balance shows," Dennis said, and stopped again. "The transfer was flagged by an institutional escrow mechanism," Margaret said, "that was linked to your mother's savings account from her time at Halbert Industrial. The account predated the power of attorney. The system flagged the transfer as an unusual large transaction and held the funds pending Frances's personal confirmation, which has not been provided." Silence. "The funds were never in the joint account," Margaret said. "They have been in institutional escrow since April. Your mother's savings have remained effectively hers." Dennis looked at Frances. Frances looked back at him. She set down her water glass. Then she said, "And I had been waiting for this, had been building toward this moment for 3 months without knowing exactly what form it would take," she said. "Dennis, I worked in financial accounting for 28 years. I set up that account in 1982. I know how the companion structure works. I signed your papers, and I never confirmed the transfer because I understood what the companion account would do." She spoke without raising her voice. She looked at him directly. "I thought you might be trying to help me in a way that wasn't actually helping me, so I waited to be sure." Dennis said, "Mom, I'm going to finish. Not harsh, just complete. I also want you to understand that I know about the guardianship consultation. I found the printer summary in September." Wallace put a pen down on his notepad. The mediator Howard had stopped writing entirely. "You were going to tell a court that I couldn't manage my own affairs," Frances said, "while you were managing them for me." The room held very still. "I don't think you're a bad person, Dennis," she said after a moment. "I think you made decisions about what I needed without asking me. And I think some of those decisions were also very convenient for you." Dennis did not speak. "I would like the power of attorney revoked and returned to its original scope. I would like the house listing suspended. I would like my accounts returned to my sole management. She folded her hands on the table. That's what I'd like. Wallace was already leaning toward Dennis, speaking quietly. The legal negotiation took another 90 minutes, during which Frances sat beside me, and I held her hand under the table once, just briefly, and she squeezed back once, and then let go. When it was over and we were standing on the street outside in the February cold, Dennis walked past us to his car without speaking. He looked at Frances once, at the bottom of the steps, and something happened in his face that was complicated enough that I couldn't read it. Then he got in his car and drove away. Pamela stopped beside Frances on the steps and said, "I hope you understand how hard he worked." Frances looked at her. "Pamela." "Not today." Pamela went to the car. Frances moved out of Dennis's house 3 weeks later. Not dramatically. She packed her things on a Saturday while Dennis was at a job site she had asked for the day. He had agreed. Some thread of not being the person who refused to allow it held in him. Gary and I drove out with Lou. Lou had brought his Subaru. We carried boxes down the stairs and loaded them while Pamela sat at the kitchen table and said nothing and kept her coffee cup in both hands. Lou carried the adding machine himself. We drove back to Ithaca in convoy, Gary and I in front, Lou behind us. Frances was in our car, in the passenger seat, watching upstate New York go by. She slept for the last hour. When she woke up, we were on the outskirts of Ithaca, and she said, "I always liked this drive." "Me too," I said. "Different in February." "Mim." She looked out the window for a while. "I was scared," she said finally. "In the beginning, when I realized what he was doing, I was very scared. I looked straight ahead at the road. I know. I kept thinking, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm reading it wrong and I ruin everything?" "You weren't wrong." "No," she said. "I wasn't." The town came up around us, familiar and gray and winter. My street, my house, the hydrangea out front that would be bare until April. "Nora," my mother said, "I need you to know something." "What?" "I am very proud that you are my daughter." I pulled into the driveway. I sat with the engine off for a moment. Then I said, "I'm very proud of you too, Mom." The guest room became Frances's room. Gary put up a curtain rod on a Saturday, and Frances chose curtains that were the wrong color for the room, and perfect. She brought a small lamp and 3 boxes of books and her houseplants, which needed repotting. We repotted them together on the back porch in March, when the weather was still cold but not quite cold enough to stay inside. Lou visited on a Sunday in April. He and Frances sat at the kitchen table and talked for 3 hours about people from Halbert Industrial and a lawsuit from 1997 that apparently nobody had ever resolved, and a road trip they'd both taken separately to the same national park in 1983. Gary and I sat in the next room and listened to them laugh twice about something we couldn't hear. "I want to tell you something about Dennis, because I've been working out what to say about him for months, and I still don't have it exactly right. He was not a monster. I've thought about this carefully. He was a man who saw an opportunity and took it, and then kept taking it, and at some point crossed a line from helping his mother to controlling her finances without fully registering the crossing. I think some part of him genuinely believed he was managing a situation that needed managing. I also think that what Frances said in that conference room, "I don't think you're a bad person. I think you made decisions about what I needed without asking me. And some of those decisions were also very convenient for you," was the most precise thing anyone could have said about it, and that the truth of it is more complicated than good person or bad person. He called once in the spring. Frances took the call. She came out of her room afterward and made tea and sat at the kitchen table and did not say what they had talked about, and I did not ask. A few weeks after that, she said to me, unprompted, "He said he didn't know about the guardianship papers, that Pamela had looked into it without telling him." I said, "Do you believe him?" She wrapped her hands around her mug. "I believe that he believes it," she said, "which isn't the same thing." We sat with that. The last thing I want to tell you happened on a Saturday in late April. I was setting up the spare desk in Frances's room. She'd asked for a proper workspace, somewhere to do her correspondence, somewhere to put her things, and I carried the adding machine in from where it had been sitting in the corner of my office. Frances was standing by the window when I came in. She turned when she heard me. I set the machine on the desk. In the April light, through the window, it was exactly what it had always been. Beige and mechanical, and very slightly absurd. A relic from a specific era, a thing that made noise, and printed on paper, and belonged to her whole career. She came over. She put both hands on it the way I remembered her doing when I was a child. She pressed one key, then another. The mechanism clattered. A strip of paper moved. She tore it off and held it. "I have not used this," she said, "in about 8 years. I know." She set the strip down on the desk. "It still works," she said. I left her there with the morning light and the old machine and whatever she was thinking, and I went to make 2 cups of coffee. My mother is 75 now. She walks to the library on Tuesdays and comes back with more books than she can carry and manages somehow. She has opinions about the hydrangea. She calls Gary by his first name, which he finds deeply satisfying. She has not given anyone power of attorney since the one she signed for Dennis was revoked. She says she'll think about it when she needs to. I think she's right. There's a version of this story that's about what Dennis did. But I've been thinking, for a long time, that it's really about something else. It's about the particular kind of quiet that looks like frailty from the outside. My mother spent 28 years in an industry that runs on documentation. She built her protection out of the things she already knew: patience, accuracy, and a system from 1982 that nobody else remembered was still running. She did not need me to rescue her. She needed me to show up and to know, when I got there, that something was worth looking at. I think about that a lot, about how many people are sitting somewhere right now, passing documents to someone they trust, waiting for the right moment, hoping that someone on the other side will notice a signal and drive 4 hours to see them. If this story moved you, I'd ask you one thing. When was the last time you asked the quiet person in your life how they actually are and waited long enough for a real answer?